They thought wealth was measured by designer suits and country club memberships. They were about to learn it's measured by character, and my grandfather had more of both than they could ever imagine. If you've ever felt embarrassed by your family treating someone you love like they're invisible, this story will hit different. Stay until the end, because what happened 20 minutes later changed everything. And hey, if you're enjoying this, hit subscribe. I promise you won't regret it. My name is Sarah. I'm 28 years old and I teach 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary in suburban Connecticut. It's not glamorous. It doesn't come with a corner office or a 6-figure salary. But every September, when I see those little faces light up because they finally understand long division or finish their first chapter book, I remember why I chose this path. My parents never understood that choice. To them, teaching was something you did when you couldn't do anything better. My mother, Patricia, made that clear the day I got my acceptance letter to the education program at State College. She held it between 2 fingers like it was contaminated and said, "Well, I suppose someone has to teach other people's children." My father, Robert, was more diplomatic. He patted my shoulder and suggested I could always go back for my MBA later. "Keep your options open, sweetheart," he said. What he meant was, don't embarrass us. But there was one person who understood. One person who called me the day I got my first teaching job, his voice cracking with pride over the phone. "Sarah, girl," he said, "you're going to change lives. That's worth more than any boardroom ever will be." That was my grandfather, William Carter. Grandpa wasn't like my parents. He didn't care about keeping up appearances or impressing the neighbors. He lived in a small farmhouse in upstate New York, the same house where he'd raised my dad and my aunt. The paint was chipping. The porch creaked, but the garden was immaculate, and there was always fresh lemonade in the fridge and wisdom in every conversation. He'd been a mechanic for most of his life. At least, that's what everyone said. He'd worked with his hands, fixed engines, lived simply. After my grandmother died when I was 10, he'd retreated even further into that quiet life. He didn't ask for much. He didn't expect much. He just loved us. Or at least, he loved me and my brother Jake in his own way. But somewhere along the line, my parents started treating him like a relic, an embarrassment, evidence of humble beginnings they wanted to forget. See, my parents had climbed. Dad's small accounting firm had grown into a regional success. Mom had cultivated friendships with the wives of executives and doctors. They'd moved from a split-level ranch to a colonial with a circular driveway. They'd traded backyard barbecues for country club galas. And they'd rewritten their story. Suddenly, Grandpa's small farmhouse became something they didn't mention at dinner parties. His mechanic's coveralls became a punchline for how far we've come. My brother Jake absorbed all of it. 5 years older than me, Jake had always been the golden child. He got the MBA my parents wanted, landed a job at a wealth management firm in Stamford, wore Tom Ford suits, and dated women who summered in the Hamptons. Last year, he met Madison Harrison. Madison's father, Richard Harrison, was the CEO of Harrison Tech Solutions, a major player in cybersecurity. Madison herself worked in marketing for a boutique firm in Manhattan, though I got the sense she didn't really need to work. She drove a BMW, wore Cartier, and had the kind of confidence that comes from never having worried about money. My parents were thrilled. Jake's engagement wasn't just a wedding. It was a merger, a social elevation, proof that the Carter family had finally arrived. When Jake announced they'd be getting married at Ridgemont Country Club, my mother actually cried. Not from sentiment, from triumph. I was sitting in the small apartment I rented near my school when Grandpa called. It was a Tuesday evening in late September, and I was grading spelling tests at my kitchen table, a mug of chamomile tea going cold beside me. "Sweetheart," he said when I picked up, his voice warm and gravelly. "I wanted to let you know I booked my flight for Jake's wedding. 6 hours from Albany to Hartford, but I wouldn't miss it for the world." My chest tightened. "Grandpa, you didn't have to do that. 6 hours is a long trip." "Nonsense. My grandson's getting married. Of course I'm coming." "Besides," he added, and I could hear the smile in his voice, "I haven't seen my favorite granddaughter in too long." "I'm your only granddaughter." Doesn't make it less true. I laughed despite myself. "When do you land? I'll pick you up from the airport." "Friday afternoon, 2:30. But you don't have to. I want to, Grandpa. I'll be there. There was a pause. Then he said, Sarah, honey, are your parents? I mean, do they want me there? I don't want to cause trouble. My throat went tight. Of course they want you there. Your family. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't exactly the truth either. The truth was that I'd heard my parents talking 2 weeks earlier. I'd stopped by their house to drop off a wedding present for Jake. Mom had insisted I contribute to their kitchen aid mixer fund, and I'd heard their voices in the study. We need to minimize his presence, Mom was saying. The Harrisons can't know we came from that background. Patricia, he's my father, Dad said, but his voice was weak, appeasing. He's going to show up in some polyester suit from 1987 and talk about fixing carburetors. Do you want Richard Harrison thinking we're unsophisticated? What do you want me to do? Uninvite him? No, but seat him somewhere discreet. Make sure he doesn't mingle too much during cocktail hour. Maybe tell him the wedding's formal so he doesn't wear those awful loafers. I'd left without saying hello. Now, holding the phone, I swallowed hard. They're just stressed about the wedding, Grandpa. You know how Mom gets. I do, he said quietly. But I'm coming for you and Jake, not for them. I'm glad, I said, and meant it. Friday came too fast and too slow. I took a personal day from school, something I rarely did, and drove to Bradley International Airport. The drive gave me too much time to think. Jake's wedding had consumed our family for months. Every conversation revolved around seating charts, floral arrangements, and whether the string quartet should play Pachelbel or Vivaldi. I'd been drafted as a bridesmaid, which mostly meant listening to Madison's friends discuss bachelorette destinations and nodding along. No one had asked what I thought. No one had asked if I was okay with missing 2 days of school during parent-teacher conference week. I was expected to show up, smile, and be grateful for the invitation. But this wasn't about me. It was about Jake. And if I was being honest, it was about my parents' need to prove something to people who probably didn't care. I pulled into the arrivals terminal just as Grandpa's flight landed. 20 minutes later, I saw him emerge through the sliding doors, a small, rolling suitcase behind him, his posture still straight despite 75 years. He was wearing a simple gray suit, not polyester, but wool, well-tailored though not designer. His white hair was neatly combed. His shoes were polished. He looked dignified, respectable. He looked like my grandpa. Sarah! His face lit up when he saw me, and I felt something in my chest unclench. I hugged him hard. He smelled like Old Spice and peppermint, the same as always. You didn't have to come all this way, I said into his shoulder. Yes, I did. He pulled back, holding me at arm's length. Look at you. You look tired. Are you taking care of yourself? I'm fine, Grandpa, just busy with school. Those kids are lucky to have you. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. Here, I know teachers always need supplies. I opened it. Inside was a check for $200 made out to me with classroom supplies written in the memo line. My eyes stung. Grandpa, you don't have to. I want to. You're doing important work, Sarah. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I tucked the check carefully into my purse and took his suitcase. Come on, let's get you home. The drive back to my parents' house was filled with easy conversation. Grandpa asked about my students, about the book I was reading, about whether I was still seeing that guy from the gym. I told him we'd broken up 3 months ago. His loss, Grandpa said firmly. You deserve someone who sees your worth. Thanks, Grandpa. When we pulled into my parents' driveway, I felt my shoulders tense. The house looked immaculate. Mom had hired landscapers to refresh the flower beds for the wedding weekend. The circular driveway held Dad's Lexus and Mom's Mercedes. We walked to the front door together. I used my key. Inside, Mom was on the phone in the kitchen, her voice sharp. No, the ivory napkins, not the cream. There's a difference, Jessica. We discussed this. Dad was in the living room reading the Wall Street Journal. He glanced up when we entered. William, he said, standing. He crossed the room and extended his hand. Good to see you. It wasn't a hug, it was a handshake, formal, distant. Robert, Grandpa said, shaking his hand. Thank you for having me. Of course, Dad gestured vaguely. Patricia's just finishing up some wedding details. You know how it is. Mom appeared in the doorway, phone still pressed to her ear. She looked at Grandpa and I saw her mouth tighten. She held up one finger, wait, and turned back to her call. Grandpa stood in the foyer, suitcase beside him, waiting. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. Finally, Mom hung up. William, she said, her smile tight. You made it. I did. Thank you for the invitation. She nodded. Robert will show you to your room. We've set you up downstairs. Downstairs. The basement guest room. The one usually reserved for contractors or my aunt when she visited after a fight with her husband. I'll take him, I said quickly. Mom's eyes flicked to me, something unreadable in them. Fine, make sure he's settled. Rehearsal dinner's at 6. We're leaving at 5:30 sharp. I led Grandpa downstairs. The basement room was clean but cold. A double bed with an old quilt. A nightstand. A lamp. No photographs. No warmth. It's cozy, Grandpa said, ever gracious. Grandpa, I'm sorry. I didn't know they were putting you down here. It's fine, sweetheart. I don't need much. But I could see the hurt in his eyes, the awareness that he'd been tucked away, hidden. Get some rest, I said. I'll come get you before we leave. He nodded and I climbed back upstairs, my jaw tight. The rehearsal dinner was at the country club. My parents, Jake, Madison, Madison's parents, the wedding party, and a few close family members. 30 people seated at a long table in a private room overlooking the 18th hole. Grandpa sat at the far end next to my Aunt Linda, who at least had the decency to talk to him. My parents flanked Richard and Catherine Harrison, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. I sat between two of Madison's bridesmaids, women named Sloane and Brittany, who spent the entire meal discussing someone's Botox and whether Tulum was over. Across the table, Jake looked happy. Nervous, but happy. Madison was radiant in a white rehearsal dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I tried to catch Grandpa's eye, but he was focused on his plate, cutting his steak methodically. After dinner, Mom gave a toast. She talked about how proud she was of Jake, how perfect Madison was for him, how the Carters and Harrisons were destined to be family. She didn't mention Grandpa once. Saturday morning arrived with October sunshine and crisp air. The wedding was at 2 o'clock. I helped Madison get ready, along with her bridesmaids, in the bridal suite at Ridgemont. At 1:30, I slipped away to check the seating arrangements. The reception hall was stunning, white flowers everywhere, chandeliers glittering, place cards in calligraphy at each setting. I found my name easily. Table 8, between my Aunt Linda and one of Jake's college friends. Then I started looking for Grandpa's. Table 10, Table 15, Table 20. Nothing. Finally, I found it. Table 47. The very last table tucked in the corner near the kitchen entrance, next to the service station where staff would be clearing dishes, next to the trash cans. My hands shook as I held his place card. William Carter, printed in the same elegant script as everyone else's, but placed where he'd be invisible, forgotten. I found my mother in the hallway, adjusting her dress in a full-length mirror. "Mom," I said, my voice low, "we need to talk about Grandpa's seat." She didn't look at me. "What about it?" "He's at table 47, next to the kitchen, by the trash." "Sarah, we have 300 guests. Not everyone can sit up front." "He flew 6 hours to be here. He's Dad's father." Now she turned, her eyes hard. "That old man will embarrass us. Look at him, wearing that cheap suit, talking about the old days. The Harrisons will think we're trashy." "He's family. He's a reminder of where we came from, and I will not let him ruin your brother's wedding with his small-town, blue-collar nonsense. He should be grateful we even invited him." My blood ran cold. "Are you serious right now?" "Keep your voice down." She stepped closer, her voice a hiss. "I have worked too hard to build this life. I will not let some sentimental nonsense about family destroy what we've achieved. He sits where I put him, and you will not cause a scene. He deserves better. He deserves what I say he deserves." Her face was flushed now, angry. "And if you can't accept that, maybe you should leave too." I stared at her. This woman who'd raised me. This woman I'd tried so hard to please. Fine, I said quietly. I'll tell him myself. I turned to walk away. Her hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. Hard. You will do no such thing. You will smile and you will keep quiet, and you will let this day be perfect. Do you understand me? I tried to pull away. Let go of me. Do you understand? You're hurting me. The slap came out of nowhere. Sharp, loud. My head snapped to the side, my cheek exploding in pain. Several guests in the hallway turned, gasped. My mother's hand was still raised, her chest heaving. Get out, she said, her voice venomous. Get out of this wedding. You're ruining your brother's special day. I touched my cheek. It was hot, throbbing. Behind Mom, I saw Jake appear in the doorway. He saw me, saw my face, and his eyes widened, but he didn't move, didn't speak. Madison was behind him, her hand on his arm. Jake, we need you for photos. He hesitated. For one moment, I thought he might say something, might defend me. Then he turned and walked away. I stood there, my face burning, my eyes stinging, and looked at my mother. I hope it was worth it, I said. Then I walked out. I made it to the parking lot before the tears came. I stood beside my car, shaking, my makeup ruined, my bridesmaid dress suddenly suffocating. Someone had taken out their phone. I'd seen them. This would be on social media within the hour. I didn't care. I cared that my mother had hit me. I cared that my brother had walked away. I cared that my grandfather was sitting inside, alone at a table meant for nobodies, and he didn't even know. I fumbled with my keys, trying to unlock the door. Then I heard it. A sound like thunder. Low, powerful, growing louder. I looked up. A private jet was descending toward the golf course adjacent to the country club. White fuselage, sleek lines. The logo on the tail read, Morrison Enterprises in navy blue letters. The jet touched down on the fairway. Smooth, controlled, impossible. It had clearance somehow. Emergency permission. Guests started pouring out of the country club, pointing, pulling out phones. The jet's door opened, stairs descended, and a man stepped out. He was in his early 50s, salt and pepper hair, an Armani suit that probably cost more than my car. He moved with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from never having to prove yourself. He walked directly toward me. "Ms. Sarah Carter?" he said, his voice calm and cultured. I nodded, too stunned to speak. "My name is Thomas Morrison. I'm a friend of your grandfather. He called me about 20 minutes ago. He said his granddaughter might need some backup." I blinked. I don't understand." Thomas looked past me toward the country club, where my parents and Jake and Madison and half the wedding party were now standing on the terrace, staring. "Let's go have a conversation with your family," he said. "I think it's time they learned a few things about respect." He offered me his arm, and I took it. Thomas Morrison walked beside me like we'd known each other for years. His stride was measured, unhurried, as if he landed private jets at country club weddings every Saturday afternoon. The crowd on the terrace parted as we approached. Women in pastel dresses clutched their champagne flutes. Men in tuxedos whispered behind their hands. Someone was definitely recording this. My mother stood frozen near the entrance, her face cycling through confusion, alarm, and something that looked like panic. My father had gone pale. Jake and Madison were at the front of the crowd, their perfect wedding tableau disrupted by the appearance of a man who commanded more attention than any floral arrangement ever could. Thomas stopped at the base of the terrace steps. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Patricia Carter, Robert Carter, Jake Carter, and the Harrison family," he said, his tone polite but edged with something that made my mother flinch. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. My name is Thomas Morrison. I'm the CEO of Morrison Enterprises." Richard Harrison's face went from curious to alert in an instant. I saw him glance at his wife, Catherine, who'd gone still. "I'm here," Thomas continued, "because 30 minutes ago, I received a call from my dear friend and business partner, William Carter." The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's mouth opened, closed. "Business partner?" she said weakly. "That's right." Thomas climbed the steps with me still on his arm. When we reached the top, he turned to address the crowd. William Carter and I met 30 years ago. I was a young aerospace engineer with a brilliant idea and no capital. William believed in me. He invested his life savings, $50,000, into what became Morrison Aerospace, now Morrison Enterprises. I felt the crowd's energy shift. Phones were definitely out now. Thomas looked directly at my parents. William took 15% equity in the company. He never wanted recognition, never wanted his name on the building. He just believed in the work, and he wanted his children, your father, Patricia, and you, Robert, to build their own success without riding his coattails. My father's face had gone from pale to gray. Dad never said, "Because he didn't want you to know," Thomas said simply. He believed wealth should be earned, not inherited, but watching how you treated him today. His voice dropped, and somehow that made it more powerful. That changed things. My mother was gripping the terrace railing. We didn't know. We had no idea. You didn't know because you never asked. Thomas's words were precise, surgical. You assumed. You judged. You placed a man who helped build a multi-billion-dollar company at table 47, next to the trash cans. Madison's mother, Catherine Harrison, made a small sound. Her husband's face had gone carefully blank, the expression of a man doing rapid mental math about business relationships. Thomas turned to me, his expression softening. Your grandfather called me after he found his place card. He wasn't angry. He was heartbroken. But not for himself. For you, Sarah. He heard what happened in that hallway. He watched you walk out alone. My eyes burned. I couldn't speak. So I came, Thomas said, to make sure William Carter gets the respect he deserves and to take him and his granddaughter somewhere more appropriate for a family celebration. Jake finally found his voice. Wait, Grandpa he's worth... William's current equity stake in Morrison Enterprises, Thomas said calmly, is valued at approximately $180 million, give or take a few million depending on the market. Someone in the crowd gasped. Madison swayed slightly. My mother actually reached out to steady herself against a column. Thomas looked at Richard Harrison. Richard, your company's largest technology contract is with Morrison Enterprises. I believe we're in the final stages of negotiating a 3-year extension worth, what was it, $45 million? Richard's carefully maintained composure cracked. Thomas, I had no idea about any of this. I'm sure you didn't. Thomas's tone was pleasant, dangerous. But I'm sure you'll understand that I'll need to review all our partnerships in light of... He gestured vaguely at the scene around us. Recent events. Catherine Harrison turned to look at my mother with an expression that could have frozen lava. Thomas offered me his arm again. Shall we collect your grandfather, Miss Carter? I nodded, not trusting my voice. We walked into the reception hall. My cheek still throbbed where my mother had hit me. My makeup was ruined. My bridesmaid dress was wrinkled. I'd never felt stronger in my life. We found Grandpa at table 47, exactly where I'd seen his place card. He was sitting alone, his hands folded in his lap, staring at nothing. William, Thomas said warmly. Grandpa looked up. When he saw Thomas, his weathered face broke into a smile. Tommy, you didn't have to... Yes, I did. Thomas pulled out a chair and sat down, completely unconcerned about his $10,000 suit, in a corner near the trash station. I sat on Grandpa's other side. Grandpa reached for my hand. His fingers were warm, calloused from decades of work. Sarah, honey, your face. I touched my cheek. I'm okay, Grandpa. She stood up for you, Thomas said, against her mother, against all of them. Grandpa's eyes filled. You shouldn't have had to do that. Yes, I should have, a long time ago. Behind us, I heard footsteps. I turned to see my mother, my father, Jake, and Madison approaching. The Harrisons hung back on the terrace, watching. My mother's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide how pale she'd gone. Dad, we didn't... You didn't know. Grandpa's voice was quiet, tired. I understand. I chose not to tell you. That's on me. But we should have... My father stopped, started again. We should have treated you better, money or no money. Yes, Grandpa said simply, You should have. Jake stepped forward. He looked young suddenly, unsure. Grandpa, I'm sorry. I saw what Mom did to Sarah. I should have said something. Why didn't you? I asked. My voice came out harder than I intended. Jake flinched. I don't know. Madison and the photos, and I don't know. You chose, I said. You chose the wedding over your sister. Madison touched Jake's arm. Jake, maybe we should… No. Jake pulled away from her. Sarah's right. I screwed up. I let Mom… He looked at our mother. I let you control everything. The wedding, the guest list, how we treat people, and I didn't say anything because it was easier. My mother's face crumpled. I just wanted today to be perfect. At what cost? I asked. She didn't answer. Thomas stood. William, Sarah, my jet is waiting. I took the liberty of having my staff prepare dinner at my home in Greenwich. It's nothing fancy. Just a quiet family meal. You're both welcome to join me. Grandpa looked at me. I looked at him. I'd like that, I said. Grandpa nodded. Me too. We stood together. Thomas placed a hand on Grandpa's shoulder, the gesture of genuine friendship, not business courtesy. My mother stepped forward. Please, Dad, don't go. We can fix this. We can move your seat. We can… Patricia. Grandpa's voice was gentle but firm. You've made it clear where I fit in your life. I'm not angry. I'm just done pretending it doesn't hurt. But we didn't know about the money. And that's exactly the problem, Grandpa said. You should have treated me with respect whether I had $1 or $1 billion. Family isn't about net worth, Patricia. It's about worth, period. He turned to Jake. Congratulations on your marriage, son. I mean that. I hope you and Madison build something real, something based on more than appearances. Jake's eyes were red. He nodded, unable to speak. Grandpa looked at my father. Robert, I love you. I always will. But I raised you to be better than this. My father's face crumpled. Dad, I'm so sorry. I got caught up in… I know. Grandpa squeezed his shoulder. I know. Then he turned to me. Ready, sweetheart? Ready. We walked out together, Grandpa, Thomas, and me, through the reception hall where 300 guests whispered and stared, through the terrace where the Harrisons watched with expressions ranging from shock to calculation, down the stone steps to the perfectly manicured lawn. The private jet waited on the golf course, its stairs still extended, afternoon sun glinting off white metal. I looked back once. My mother was crying, my father's arm around her. Jake stood apart, Madison beside him but not touching him. The entire wedding party, bridesmaids in lavender, groomsmen in tuxedos, stood frozen like a photograph of opulence interrupted. Then I climbed into the jet and didn't look back again. The interior of Thomas Morrison's private jet was understated elegance. Cream leather seats, walnut tables, soft lighting. A flight attendant offered us champagne. I took water. Grandpa did the same. As the jet lifted off, perfectly legal, Thomas assured us, he had standing emergency clearance at several locations. I leaned my head against the window and watched the country club shrink below us. How long have you known? I asked Grandpa. That Tommy would come? Grandpa smiled. I called him when I found my place card. I didn't ask him to fly out. I just needed to talk to someone. I was in Hartford for meetings anyway, Thomas said from across the cabin. When William told me what was happening, I simply moved up my departure time. By 6 hours? I said. Thomas shrugged. I have excellent pilots. Grandpa took my hand. I heard what your mother said to you. I heard the slap. I was coming to find you when I saw you in the parking lot. I'm sorry you had to hear that. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I thought… He sighed. I thought if I stayed quiet, stayed small, I wouldn't cause problems, that Patricia would eventually come around. But I taught my son the wrong lesson. I taught him that love means accommodating cruelty, and he taught your brother the same thing. It's not your fault, Grandpa. Maybe not, but I can do better going forward. The flight to Greenwich took 30 minutes. Thomas's home turned out to be a restored colonial estate with 6 fireplaces, a chef who prepared roasted chicken with herbs from the garden, and enough guest rooms that Grandpa and I could stay as long as we needed. We ate dinner at a farmhouse table in the kitchen. Thomas's preference, he said, over the formal dining room. It was just the three of us, plus Thomas's wife, Margaret, who turned out to be a retired neurosurgeon with a wicked sense of humor. "So, William," Margaret said, serving herself green beans, "when are you going to tell me the story about the carburetor and the state senator?" Grandpa laughed, really laughed for the first time all day. "I thought Tommy would have told you that one by now." "He tried, but you tell it better." They launched into a story from the early days of Morrison Aerospace, when Grandpa had fixed a state senator's car on the side of the highway and somehow ended up with the political connections that secured their first government contract. I sat back and watched my grandfather come alive. Watched him gesticulate and joke and argue good-naturedly with Thomas about whose memory was more accurate. This was the man I knew, the man my parents had tried to hide. After dinner, Thomas showed me to a guest room with a 4-poster bed and windows overlooking gardens lit with subtle path lighting. "Stay as long as you need," he said. "Both of you. I mean that." "Thank you. For today. For everything." Thomas smiled. "Your grandfather gave me my start when no one else would. He believed in me when I was nobody. That kind of debt doesn't have a repayment schedule." "I don't think he sees it as a debt." "I know. That's why I'm still trying to pay it." That night, I lay in a bed that cost more than my monthly rent and stared at the ceiling. My phone had been vibrating all evening, texts from my mother, my father, Jake, Aunt Linda, even a few from Madison's bridesmaids asking if I was okay, if the rumors about Grandpa were true, if Thomas Morrison was really... I turned my phone off. The truth was, I didn't know what I felt. Relief, certainly, vindication, but also grief, because my family had shown me exactly who they were today, and I couldn't unsee it. The week after the wedding felt surreal. Thomas and Margaret went to their offices. She still consulted part-time, and Grandpa and I stayed at the Greenwich estate like refugees from our own lives. On Monday, I called my principal and used 3 personal days. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "Take care of yourself, Sarah." On Tuesday, Grandpa and I took a walk through Thomas's gardens. Fall in Connecticut was sharp and beautiful, leaves turning copper and gold, air smelling of wood smoke and apples. "Do you regret it?" I asked. "Keeping the money secret?" Grandpa considered. "I regret that it made my son think I had nothing to offer. I regret that it made your mother think success was about appearance instead of character. But the money itself?" He shook his head. "Money reveals who people are. It doesn't change them. Mom and Dad would have treated you differently if they'd known." "Exactly. And I wouldn't have known if they loved me or my bank account." We walked in silence for a while. Then Grandpa said, "What about you? What are you going to do?" "I don't know. I can't go back to how things were." "No," he agreed. "You can't." On Wednesday, my father called. I let it go to voicemail. He called 3 more times. On the 4th, I answered. "Sarah, please, we need to talk." "About what, Dad?" "About everything. Your mother is devastated. Jake's marriage is, Madison's parents are..." He stopped. "We made mistakes." "Mistakes?" I heard my voice go cold. "Dad, Mom hit me in front of 100 people, and you did nothing." I know, and I'm so sorry." "Are you? Or are you sorry that Grandpa turned out to be rich and now the Harrisons are reconsidering business deals?" Silence. "Sarah, that's not fair." "Isn't it? Be honest, Dad. If Grandpa was actually just a mechanic, if Thomas Morrison hadn't shown up, would you be calling me right now? Or would you have told me I overreacted?" More silence. "That's what I thought," I said, and hung up. On Thursday, Thomas invited Grandpa and me into his study. "I have a proposition," he said. "Or rather, William does." Grandpa looked uncomfortable. "I've been thinking about the money, about what it means." "Okay," I said carefully. "Most of it's just sitting there, growing. I don't need it. I live simply because that's who I am, but you..." He looked at me. "You could do good with it, real good." "Grandpa, I don't want your money." "I'm not offering you my money. I'm offering you a chance to make a difference." He leaned forward. "Thomas and I have been discussing establishing a foundation for education, specifically for teachers. Thomas nodded. Teacher salaries are criminally low. Classroom supplies come out of pocket. Professional development is underfunded. We want to change that. The Sarah Carter Teaching Excellence Foundation, Grandpa said. My throat went tight. You can't name it after me. Why not? You're a teacher. You sacrificed your own money for your students. You understand what teachers need. And, his voice went soft, you stood up for what was right, even when it cost you everything. I couldn't speak. We're proposing an initial endowment of $20 million, Thomas said. It'll fund teacher grants, classroom supplies, scholarships for students entering education programs. We want you on the board, not as a figurehead, as someone who knows the work. I'm a third-grade teacher. You're a woman who chose purpose over prestige, Grandpa said. That's exactly who should be making these decisions. I looked at these two men, one who'd given everything for a dream, one who'd achieved that dream and never forgot who helped him get there, and I felt something shift in my chest. Okay, I said. Yes, let's do it. The news hit 3 days after the wedding. Someone at the country club had recorded the whole thing, my mother slapping me, Thomas's arrival, the revelation about Grandpa's wealth. It went viral. Not because people love drama, though they do, but because the story hit a nerve. How many people had been treated as less than by their own families? How many had been judged for their choices, their careers, their quiet dignity? The comments were brutal toward my parents, sympathetic toward me, curious about Grandpa. On Friday, exactly 1 week after the wedding, I drove back to my apartment. Grandpa came with me. We'd decided he'd stay in Connecticut for a while. Thomas had a guest cottage he rarely used, and Grandpa and Margaret had discovered they were both obsessed with British detective shows. My apartment felt small after Thomas's estate, but it was mine. My books, my papers, my life. There was a package waiting outside my door. Inside was a letter from Jake. Sarah, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if I deserve for you to read this, but I need to say it anyway. I was wrong, not just wrong. I was a coward. I saw what Mom did to you. I heard what she said about Grandpa, and I did nothing because it was easier, because I wanted my perfect wedding more than I wanted to be a decent person. Madison and I are in counseling. Her parents pulled back from all the wedding planning they'd promised. They're reconsidering a lot of things about our families. But that's not why I'm writing. I'm writing because you're my sister, because you've always been the brave one, because you stood up when I couldn't. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I see what I did, and I'm trying to be better. Love, Jake. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my desk drawer. Forgiveness wasn't something I could offer yet, maybe not ever. But acknowledgement, that was something. 3 months passed like water finding a new course. I returned to teaching. My students welcomed me back with handmade cards and questions about why I'd been gone. I told them I'd had some family things to work through. Third graders accepted that without prying. The Sarah Carter Teaching Excellence Foundation launched in January. The press coverage was modest but meaningful. 20 teachers in Connecticut received grants for classroom supplies. 5 students got scholarships to education programs. It was a start. My mother called once a week. I answered once a month. Our conversations were stilted, careful. She never apologized in so many words, just said things like, I wish I'd handled that differently, and I've been doing a lot of thinking. My father was more direct. I failed you, he said one afternoon when I met him for coffee, neutral ground at a Starbucks halfway between our towns. I let your mother run the family like a business, and I forgot what matters. What matters, Dad? You, Jake, love, basic human decency. He stirred his coffee, not meeting my eyes. I'm trying to make amends. With your grandfather. With you. It's going to take time. I know. We were trying, but the foundation had cracked. Maybe it would heal. Maybe it wouldn't. Jake's marriage survived, but barely. He and Madison moved out of their downtown condo into a modest house in the suburbs. He took a job at a smaller firm, one without connections to Morrison Enterprises. Madison started working full-time instead of part-time. They were building something real instead of something impressive. The first time Jake called me after the letter, his voice was hesitant. Sarah, can we talk? We are talking. I mean, really talk. In person. I met him at a diner near my school. He looked tired, older than 35. Thank you for meeting me, he said. I'm here, but I can't promise anything, Jake. I know. I just need you to understand. What I did, walking away when Mom hit you, it wasn't because I didn't care. It was because I was scared. Scared of disrupting my perfect day. Scared of what people would think. And that makes it worse, not better. I looked at my brother, the golden child who'd had everything handed to him, who'd lost some of that shine and was trying to figure out who he was underneath. You hurt me, I said. Not just that day. For years. Every time you let Mom make me feel less than. Every time you benefited from my sacrifice and never acknowledged it. I know. I don't know if we can get back to where we were. I don't either, but I want to try. Not because Grandpa's rich, not because it makes family dinners easier, but because you're my sister, and I love you, and I've been a terrible brother. It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was honest. We can try, I said. Slowly. He nodded. Slowly. In March, Grandpa turned 76. We celebrated at Thomas's estate, a small gathering. Me, Thomas and Margaret. Aunt Linda, who'd called me every week since the wedding and never once tried to defend my parents' behavior. A few of Grandpa's friends from upstate New York who'd driven down. No Patricia. No Robert. Grandpa had set that boundary himself. I love them, he told me one evening. But love doesn't mean accepting poor treatment. They need to learn that, and I need to respect myself enough to demand better. At the birthday dinner, Thomas stood to give a toast. 30 years ago, a mechanic with dirt under his fingernails handed me $50,000 and told me to build something that mattered. He didn't ask for control, didn't demand recognition, just believed in the work. William Carter taught me that wealth isn't about accumulation. It's about what you do with it, how you treat people, who you become when no one's watching. Happy birthday, old friend. You made me rich, but more importantly, you made me better. We raised our glasses. Sparkling cider for me, whiskey for Grandpa, wine for everyone else. Later, Grandpa pulled me aside. We stood on the terrace overlooking gardens that were just beginning to wake up after winter. I've been thinking about what comes next, he said. What do you mean? The foundation is in good hands. You're running it beautifully, but there's more I want to do, more I want to give. Grandpa, you've already given so much, not money, time, presence. He smiled. I'm thinking about moving closer, to you, maybe buying a small place near your school. I could volunteer, read with kids, help in classrooms, be useful. My eyes stung. You'd do that? Sarah, you're the best thing I ever helped create. Not a company, not wealth. You, your kindness, your integrity. I want to spend my remaining years supporting that, if you'll have me. I hugged him hard. He smelled like Old Spice and peppermint and home. Always, I whispered. Always. It's been 6 months now since the wedding that wasn't mine, since the slap, since the private jet landed and changed everything. I still teach 3rd grade. I still drive a sensible Honda. I still live in my small apartment, though Grandpa keeps offering to buy me a house. I keep declining. Because here's what I learned. Worth isn't measured in zeros on a bank statement. It's measured in who shows up when you're standing alone in a parking lot. It's measured in who calls you when you fail, not just when you succeed. It's measured in whether you choose kindness when cruelty would be easier. My mother and I are cordial now, not close. Maybe we never will be. She's in therapy, Dad tells me, working on things. Jake and I have coffee once a month. It's awkward. He's trying. So am I. But Grandpa moved to a cottage 3 miles from my school. He volunteers every Tuesday and Thursday, reading with struggling students. The kids adore him. They call him Mr. William and show him their drawings and tell him about their baby siblings and lost teeth. Last week, one of my students asked if Mr. William was my grandpa. He is, I said. You're so lucky, she said. He's the nicest. I know, I told her. I really am. Sometimes walking away isn't cruelty. It's survival. I didn't lose my family that day at the wedding. I found my worth. And that's the greatest inheritance Grandpa ever gave me. Not money, not connections, but the understanding that I deserved to be treated with respect, that I was enough just as I was. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, you're never too old to set boundaries and never too young to demand respect. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.